Good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed for the chance to be with you this afternoon. Some of us, Linda, myself and others, have spent yesterday at the first meeting of the Interceltic Forum, bringing together governments from parts of Spain, France and the United Kingdom, together with our colleagues from the Republic of Ireland. And part of what I'm going to do this afternoon is to draw on some of that experience in talking about the future of our economies as Celtic nations and regions. But my starting point is that we share a number of key goals. All of us here are interested in a peaceful future for our citizens. We're all interested in the creation of prosperity. We are all concerned at the need to act in a way that preserves the future of our fragile planet, and we're all of us hoping that there will be a better future for our children and our grandchildren. The challenge is much less in articulating goals than in designing a repertoire of actions to help us towards those things which we would all want to achieve. And what I'm going to try to do in the next 10 minutes or so is to sketch in a small number of aspects which I think those of us who are fortunate enough to live within that Celtic tent, those things which I think we can put to work to help us to shape that future. And to differing extents, all the dimensions that I'm going to concentrate on, I will argue, have a particularly Celtic character. What all the four aspects have in common, however, is that they are a focus on capital of different kinds. And I'm going to focus on four aspects of that capital: cultural capital, environmental capital, societal and human capital. All of those are assets which I believe can be mobilized in pursuit of our common economic goals. I pause for a minute to see if it's worth a summary of that for people to follow.
Oui, ça c'est... Il va y avoir une traduction, un petit résumé à chaque fois. Donc, le Premier ministre de Belgal, de l'Assemblée de Belgal, vous remercie de l'opportunité d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Et hier, il était au Celtic Forum, très contente d'échanger avec des politiciens et des gens de tous les pays celtes. Il voudrait parler de l'avenir de nos économies. On prend ça comme donnée que nous partageons les objectifs clés, par exemple la paix, la création de la prospérité et un meilleur avenir pour nos enfants et nos petits-enfants. Le défi, c'est pas forcément d'élaborer ou d'expliquer ces buts, que de dessiner un inventaire d'actions pour nous aider à les réaliser. Donc je vais donner des grandes lignes pour un petit nombre de perspectives que je crois que nous, dans les pays celtes, pourrions utiliser à l'avenir. Largement, ces dimensions ils ont un caractère particulièrement celte.
Merci. Running through the approach which you just heard is that it has at its starting point an emphasis on our strengths as Celtic economies, rather than dwelling exclusively on the many challenges which are undoubtedly there and face us all. But rather than a preoccupation with our difficulties, then my belief is that the best way in which we can move towards the goals we share is by a focus on our assets. Those many, many strengths that we have in common. And that's why I wanted to focus this afternoon on this idea of 4 different sources of capital that we can draw upon and put to work. And what I will do is I will pause after the first 2 and then complete the 4 after that. So I'm going to begin by talking about cultural capital. I do so because in some ways it's the most obvious place to begin. The Celtic nations and regions share a history that is the longest recorded history in Europe. The Welsh language has the oldest literature of any language spoken in Europe today. The literature goes back continuously for over 1,500 years. The wealth of our common cultural inheritance is absolutely evident to anybody, but it is not often enough conceptualized, I believe, as an economic or a business asset. Now, there are examples, of course, where that is already true. Tourism would be the most obvious one. All of us attract people to come to the places in which we live because of the history that we are able to have on display. But the economic asset of our cultural capital should, I believe, do far more than simply be a source of visitors to our different nations and regions. So in Wales, to give you just that example, we have a programme which links the whole of Wales together from north to south in a way that seeks to make an economic asset of the language that we speak. The fact that you are able to speak 2 languages is, and ought to be, something that offers you as an individual many economic opportunities. We need people to work in our public services, for example, in our health services, in our care services, in our schools and universities, who are able to speak both the languages that are in everyday use in Wales. And yet many of our young people who are entirely fluent in both Welsh and in English don't think of that capacity as an asset to them in pursuing the careers that will shape their lives. Nor do we often enough think of language and culture as a way in which we can attract to our different nations and regions investments from other parts of the world. In a period of footloose global companies, why would a company choose to invest in any particular place? If you can go anywhere, why do you decide to go somewhere? Well, I believe that companies who have those choices in their hands want to come to and invest in places that have something special to offer, that have a character, that have a culture, that says to people who travel with them and come to set up home alongside those companies, that if you are in Brittany, in Scotland, in Ireland, in Cornwall, in Wales, you are not in just some other anonymous spot on the face of the globe. You are somewhere which will offer you something rooted, something particular and special that makes that destination the destination of choice. So the longest standing investors in the Welsh economy are Japanese companies who came to Wales in the 1970s and recently celebrated half a century of investment in the Welsh economy. when I was lucky enough to go to Japan 3 years ago for another Rugby World Cup, I met a group of people, mostly in their 70s and 80s, who belonged to something in Tokyo called the Club Hiraeth. Club Hiraeth is a Welsh term. Hiraeth is a word you can't translate into another language. It means something beyond a simple translation. But it really means a sense of longing and a sense of attraction to your place that is home. And these are Japanese investors, people who came to live and work in Wales 50 years ago, who want to get together in Tokyo to remember the place where they had been and where they had invested not simply money and equipment, but parts of their lives. Now that is a cultural connection, and it is part of the cultural capital that those of us who are lucky enough to live in the Celtic nations and regions have at our disposal, and which I believe, in shaping economic futures, we need to put to work to help us to achieve the goals that I mentioned at the outset. Let me just deal with my second form of capital for this afternoon, and I'll pause for a moment. So this is what I'm calling, for the sake of the argument, societal capital. Now, I just caught the very end of your last speaker, when he talked about the place we are in today, and then where I was yesterday would be another example, as a small city like Edinburgh or Cardiff, where our predisposition as Celtic nations and regions is towards a preference for cooperation over competition. And this is, to my mind, a very significant asset which can be put to work for economic and business purposes. Our natural inclination, when faced with a common problem, is to say, how can we best work together in order to mobilise all the resources we have, and therefore design solutions which work for us all. That sense of societies in which trust-based relationships are the way in which business is conducted, business of all sorts, public business, private business, business as private citizens as well. That sense of a society based on pursuit of goals which are shared between us. In Wales, we have something called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It requires us in law to think always of how decisions we make today not simply have an impact upon today's citizens, but those who will come after us in the future. And one of the 7 goals of that Act is to create a more equal Wales. Equality. It's there, right at the heart of what matters to us, just as it is often at the heart of ambitions in other Celtic nations and regions. So this sense of societal capital, that we occupy communities where our sense of being equal citizens, jointly engaged in the pursuit of common goals, is, I think, an asset to us in that creation of economic futures for ourselves, but also for those who come after us.
Ok. Donc, Marc parle du capital. Et le capital, c'est difficile de traduire, c'est les actifs, les qualités, les avantages. Il parle de plusieurs types. Il y a culturel, environnemental, sociétal et humain. Donc, c'est des points forts qui peuvent être mobilisés pour atteindre les buts, les objectifs économiques. C'est une approche qui est un point de départ dont les points forts, certes, il ne faut pas trop se préoccuper des difficultés, mais surtout partir des points forts. Donc, pour commencer avec les qualités ou les actifs, nos actifs culturels, parfois c'est parfois difficile de regarder ça, de mettre une valeur là-dessus. On pense souvent au tourisme. Mais le tourisme, c'est juste un petit côté. Il y a la langue, il y a 1500 années d'histoire, donc les qualités du business, de tourisme. Les langues, la langue, il y a beaucoup de gens en Pays de Galles qui parlent gallois et anglais, donc ils sont bilingues, mais ils ne se rendent même pas compte à quel point c'est une qualité. Donc ils ne voient même pas le côté positif de parler deux langues. Et dans les industries et dans la médecine et plein de choses en Pays de Galles, c'est essentiel de pouvoir parler ces deux langues pour aider toute la population. Donc, pour les grands investisseurs partout dans le monde, il appelait Footloose, donc c'est qu'ils peuvent aller partout dans le monde où ils veulent. Pourquoi poser le pied et rester, poser la valise en Pays de Galles? Il y a quelque chose qui les attire. C'est quelque chose qui attire les grands investisseurs. C'est les endroits qui ont quelque chose de plus, un caractère, un manque d'anonymité, qui donne des racines aux gens qui viennent travailler. Par exemple, les premiers arrivés pour investir au Japon, c'était investir au Pays de Galles, c'était des Japonais qui sont venus dans les années 70, donc maintenant ils ont fêté 50 ans d'implantation au Pays de Galles. Et Marc parlait de la dernière fois qu'il était au Japon, c'était pour le rugby, et il a visité un club pour les Japonais qui avaient travaillé au Pays de Galles, qui se réunissaient pour... le mot en japonais, c'est presque impossible de traduire, mais c'est une idée des souvenirs, de nostalgie, d'un échange pour ce qu'ils ont vécu en Pays de Galles. Donc, les Japonais ont été très, très attirés par le Pays de Galles parce que c'est devenu chez eux. Vraiment, ils étaient accueillis et ils étaient chez eux. Le deuxième type de capital, d'actifs, c'est la société. Et il parle de l'idée que les investisseurs sont d'avoir, les gens préfèrent avoir des petites cités où on trouve peut-être plus facilement l'égalité, où on travaille mieux en coopération, les petites cités comme Édimbourg ou Cardiff, où on fait des collaborations plutôt que d'être en concurrence. Et ça veut dire qu'on pose la question comment on peut travailler ensemble pour résoudre un problème. Et c'est une relationnelle du business basée sur la confiance aux autres, les objectifs partagés. Et en Pays de Galles, il y a une loi, un acte, on appelle ça, qui s'appelle le bien-être des générations futures. Donc, en Pays de Galles, on est obligé de penser à l'avenir pour les gens qui viennent.
Merci. Well, my object this afternoon is to argue that there are key qualities that we share as Celtic nations and regions, properly mobilised, can be assets to us in the way we shape our future economies. I'm very briefly, in view of the time, going to mention my final two sources of capital. So my third is that of environmental capital. For many years, Wales, when the coal industry began to come to an end, found ourselves there on the western edge of Northern Europe, where distances are long, supply chains are complex, and our geography was not an asset to us in shaping our economic future. Today, all of that has changed. What the Celtic nations and regions share is the enormous advantage of being on that western edge. Sea, maritime-based nations and regions, the wind blowing in off the Atlantic. It rains occasionally in Wales, and I've seen it rain here last day. All those things, all those natural environmental assets that allow us to shape the future based on renewable and especially marine-based energy are in the hands of the Celtic nations and regions. At the Celtic Forum yesterday, we spent a lot of our time focusing on ways in which we can cooperate between our ports and between that intellectual power that we can bring together for challenges like consenting. How do you have regimes that allow marine energy to be harvested without damaging that very fragile ecology? How do we make sure that by better working together, we pool those resources and create those shared successful futures? Our environmental capital is, at this point in the 21st century, something which can shape our own economic futures, but in doing so, we will be creating those technologies and those possibilities which will be important right around the globe, as the whole of the world has to find a way of powering itself without a reliance on the inevitably diminishing sources of fossil fuels. And so to my final capital alongside that, and that is probably the most important source of capital of all, and that is our human capital. The people who we have and who we are able to provide with those skills that they will need in order to be able to take advantage of this fourth industrial revolution. But alongside that shared skills agenda, I'm going to argue this afternoon that there is a sense of innovation that links together the Celtic nations and regions. A way of thinking about our economic futures that means that we are prepared to act together in a way that shapes a sense of the economy that is right for this point in our history. Many of us are, for example, joint members of the Wellbeing Economics Network, a network that, as well as Celtic nations, includes Canada, New Zealand, Iceland, Norway, and other countries who want to rethink what we mean by economic value, who understand that if your sense of what an economy produces is simply gross value added and takes no account of environmental degradation and growing inequality, at the very most you've only answered half of that important question. By acting together through human capital and using that capacity that we share to think innovatively about the type of economy that we are trying to create, how we distribute the good that it will produce, how we make sure that we do that in a way that does not damage fundamental aspects of our lives, then we put that human capital to work alongside the three other forms of capital that I'm trying to focus upon this afternoon.
So, with the key qualities, oui, je dois faire en français. Je savais pas comment dire ça. Les qualités clés de cette approche sont partagées par toutes les nations celtes. Le troisième qualité, le troisième capital avantage, c'est l'environnement. Donc le Pays de Galles, c'est au bord, vraiment à l'est de l'Europe du Nord. À la fin de l'âge de charbon en Pays de Galles, c'était une époque difficile, la géographie était difficile et c'était loin de tout. Et maintenant, cette même géographie est devenue un avantage parce qu'il y a la mer, le vent, parfois la pluie, et les renouvelables marines, en particulier, en commun avec les autres nations celtes, nous avons l'avenir entre nos mains. Donc, il nous faut essayer de trouver des solutions pour aller en avant vers les projets marins sans faire des dégâts sur l'environnement, et il faut mettre ensemble nos ressources et nos idées. Et comme ça, on peut former nos propres avenirs économiques. Et ça, c'est aussi important autour du monde, dans chaque pays du monde, de trouver un moyen de se ressourcer sans avoir besoin du pétrolium et d'autres fossil fuels. Et le quatrième, peut-être le plus important des qualités et des avantages, c'est l'avantage humain. C'est les personnes que nous avons et les acquis de ces personnes qui sont en train de participer à la 4e révolution industrielle. Il faut partager ces acquis et dans les pays celtes, il y a un sens de l'innovation et une attitude qui va dans ce sens. Et c'est vrai, c'est le cas de toutes les nations celtes et ça se passe vraiment maintenant. Et il y a un réseau économique qui s'appelle Wellbeing Economic Network, qui lie l'idée du bien-être avec l'économie. Et le Pays de Galles en fait partie, tout comme l'Islande, et je n'ai pas noté les autres, mais bon, voilà. Désolée. Parce que les statistiques économiques, la réussite, le bénéfice, ça fait que la moitié de l'histoire, l'autre moitié, c'est le bien-être et le capital, les avantages humains, c'est les pensées innovatives, d'essayer de distribuer du bien-être et d'éviter de faire du mal au monde.
To end very briefly then, if you take this asset-based approach to thinking about the future of our economies, and particularly if you think of those as shared assets between the Celtic nations and regions, then I think that underpins the things that government can do in that shared endeavour to create economies of the future. What governments do is, I think, actually very simple. We invest in infrastructure, we invest in skills, and to a directed extent, we invest in those emerging industries that need that helping hand from government in order that they can become fully and independently established. Those simple ambitions of government, however, need to be animated by a series of principles which unite those endeavours. And what I've tried to do this afternoon is to set out 4 key areas which I think underpin the efforts that we can make together to shape those economic futures and to do it in a way which both reflects the nature of Celtic societies but also puts that to work for us collectively. And for that reason, my very final point would be that if we are to extract the maximum advantage from those strengths that we commonly possess, then working together to maximise those advantages will always be the way in which we provide the maximum return for all our fellow citizens, in whichever part of that Celtic network they happen to reside. So, merci beaucoup, thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd.